Chapter 2. The Silver Dawn. The silver plains were quiet at sunrise. Tall grass stretched to the horizon in rolling waves, its silvery green tips shimmering in the early light. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of dew and far-off wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a lone meadowlark called, the sound thin and sweet over the vast open space. At the edge of their small camp, Kaelen crouched over a low fire, bare-legged save for worn linen shorts, turning a skillet with the focus of a craftsman. The sizzle of sausage mingled with the sharp aroma of onions and rosemary, the smell carrying far in the still morning. Izzi sat cross-legged on her bedroll, her hair a mess from sleep, wearing a loose cotton tunic that hung just above her knees. She was sharpening one of her daggers on a whetstone, watching Kaelen work with a smirk. "You know," she said, "if you weren't built like a walking siege tower, you could make a fortune as a chef." Kaelen didn't look up. "And here I thought you kept me around for my good looks." "That too," Izzi said, "but mostly it's the sausage." He glanced at her, eyebrow raised. "The food," she cut in quickly, rolling her eyes. "You wish." Kaelen set a plate in front of her with theatrical care, sausages crisped to perfection, potatoes fried golden with herbs, and a hunk of bread still warm from the fire. "Eat fast," he said. "The caravan won't wait for us." She took a bite, groaning in exaggerated delight. "Gods, if you ever leave me, I'll starve to death." "You'd starve," he said, taking his own plate and settling opposite her, "because you can't cook anything that doesn't involve wine, cheese, or flirting with the tavern staff until they feed you." She grinned. "Why work for food when you can charm someone else into making it?" The sun climbed higher, painting the plains in gold. From here, they could see the faint dust trail of wagons moving along the road, the caravan they'd been tracking since yesterday. Kaelen nodded toward it between bites. "We'll need to catch them before they reach the river crossing." Izzi wiped her hands on a cloth, already reaching for her satchel. "Then let's finish eating. I'm not chasing a lead on an empty stomach." Breakfast didn't last long, it never did on the road, but the slow, easy rhythm of the morning lingered as they cleaned up camp. Kaelen started with the fire, kicking a bit of dirt over the coals until they hissed into silence. He was methodical, wiping down the skillet with a scrap of linen before tucking it into its place in his pack. His movements were efficient but unhurried, every step of the process drilled into habit from years of travel. Izzi, meanwhile, was going through her own ritual. She stood barefoot in the grass, rolling her shoulders and tilting her head from side to side until the stiffness worked itself out. She braided her hair back in a loose tail, fingers quick and practiced, before strapping on her leather bracers. Her daggers went in first, one at each thigh, followed by the short rapier at her hip. "You polish that thing more than you polish your boots," Kaelen said as he strapped on his sword belt. "My boots don't keep me alive," Izzi replied without looking up. Kaelen grunted, checking the straps on his great sword. He always double-checked, once in the morning, once before a fight. Izzi had learned long ago not to tease him about it. The habit was as much about calming his mind as it was about readiness. Once their weapons were settled, Kaelen began packing the tent. His size and strength made it easy for him to fold and roll the canvas alone, but Izzi still stepped in to help tie it. "Remind me again," she said as she cinched the rope tight. "Why am I always the one carrying the tent poles?" "Because I carry everything else that weighs more than you," Kaelen said. "And because if I let you pack them, you'd lose one within the week." She huffed but didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. By the time camp was packed and their bedrolls strapped to their packs, the sun had climbed higher. The silver plains glowed under its light, every blade of grass tipped in gold. In the distance, the faint dust plume of the caravan had grown larger, the silhouettes of wagons and riders slowly taking shape against the horizon. Kaelen took a long drink from his water skin before passing it to Izzi. "Still time to get ahead of them if we move now." Izzi wiped her mouth and handed it back. "Good. I'd rather meet them on the road than have them wondering why two strangers are standing still, staring at them like creeps." "You think anyone sees us out here?" Kaelen asked, shouldering his pack. Izzi smirked. "If they do, they'll just assume I'm the one worth staring at." Kaelen didn't rise to the bait, but the corner of his mouth twitched as they started walking toward the road, the wind in the grass whispering around them. The dust plume ahead grew with every step. By the time they reached the worn track that cut across the silver plains, the sounds of the caravan carried on the wind, the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of harnesses, the rhythmic clop of hooves. The caravan stretched longer than Izzi expected. Half a dozen wagons loaded with crates and covered goods, riders flanking on either side, and a few smaller carts straggling behind. The lead wagon bore a painted crest, a golden sun over a silver river, the merchant house of Ravane and Sons, known for trading across half the known realms. Kaelen's gaze swept the guards first, cataloging swords, armor, and watchfulness. "Well armed for a merchant run," he muttered. "Which means valuable cargo," Izzi said, her eyes flicking over bolts of cloth and casks strapped under canvas. She smiled faintly. "And people who know things." A pair of outriders spotted them and slowed, the older of the two lifting a hand in greeting. "Travelers?" he called, reining in. "You've got good timing. The road's clear ahead for now. If you're heading east, you're welcome to walk in our shadow." Kaelen nodded politely, but Izzi stepped forward, the easy warmth in her voice as natural as breathing. "Kind of you. We've been chasing this road since yesterday. Figured we might find better company than the grass and the wind." The outrider smiled at that, though his gaze lingered a little too long on her. "Company we have plenty of, just stay out from under the wheels, eh?" He spurred his horse back toward the head of the train. They fell in alongside the middle wagons, matching their pace to the steady clatter of hooves. Traders called to one another across the gaps, the air thick with the smells of spice, leather, and sun-warmed wood. Somewhere near the front, a woman sang under her breath in a language Izzi didn't know, the tune winding through the creak of the wheels like a thread of silver. It was then she saw it, not in the cargo but hanging from the belt of a young scribe perched on the rear step of a wagon. A small pouch, the drawstring decorated with a charm shaped like a crescent moon. The design wasn't exact, but the curling lines of the charm were close enough to the runestone's markings to make her pause. Kaelen caught the shift in her gaze immediately. "You see something?" "Maybe," Izzi murmured. "Let's keep walking. No sense spooking anyone until I'm sure." As they moved with the caravan, the young scribe glanced back at them, once, twice, a flicker of recognition in his eyes before he turned away. Izzi's smile returned, sharper now. "Oh yes," she said under her breath. "I see something." They hadn't set out after the caravan just for company. 2 days ago, in a roadside inn east of Avaren, Kaelen had overheard two merchants whispering over mugs of ale about a moon-marked relic passing through the Silver Plains under quiet guard. The description had been vague, deliberately so, but it had been enough to hook Izzi's attention. This caravan's route matched the one Kaelen remembered, and so they'd followed the dust until it came into view. Now walking alongside the middle wagons, Izzi drifted her steps closer to the young scribe perched on the rear step of a covered cart. He was thin, maybe 20 summers, with sun-flushed cheeks and ink stains dark on his fingertips. A small pouch hung from his belt, its drawstring tipped with a charm shaped like a crescent moon, the curling lines of its design uncomfortably close to the runestone's markings. "Nice trinket," Izzi said lightly, her eyes flicking to the charm. The scribe's head came up fast, as if she'd caught him doing something he shouldn't. Thank you." His voice was careful, the kind of careful that made it sound like he was checking every word before it left his mouth. "Where's it from?" she asked. His hand twitched toward the pouch, not quite touching it, before retreating to grip the wagon's edge. "Gift. From my master." Izzi tilted her head. "Generous gift. Doesn't look like something you'd find in a market stall." He shifted on the step, eyes darting toward the front of the caravan before coming back to her. "Said it's good luck, that's all." The wagon jolted over a rut, and he nearly lost his grip on the railing. Izzi caught his elbow lightly, steadying him. His thank you was so quiet she almost missed it, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. Behind her, Kaelen was already peeling off toward a supply cart where the air smelled of dried meat and baked bread. The trader there, a stout woman with sun-creased skin, was shifting parcels of cheese wrapped in cloth. "What's for trade?" Kaelen asked, his tone easy. "Salt pork, smoked lamb, hard cheese," she replied briskly. "Loaves fresh from dawn." Kaelen eyed a ring of cured sausage. "I'll take 2. Coin or work?" "Coin," she said, already reaching for the goods. Back by the scribe's wagon, Izzi let the silence stretch just enough to make him glance at her again. "You headed east with this lot?" she asked. "Veylmar," he said, quick but not quite steady. Her smile was slow. "Good port city, lots of markets, busy." He nodded once, then seemed to remember himself and looked away again. Kaelen reappeared beside her, chewing on a strip of sausage. "So?" Izzi stepped back from the wagon, eyes still on the charm. "We're going to Veylmar." By the time the caravan made camp, the horizon was a band of dying gold, the silver plains melting into shadows. The wagons formed a loose circle against the wind, their wheels creaking as they settled into place. A half-dozen fires flared to life, sending smoke curling into the cooling air. Izzi moved through it all like she belonged there. She helped an older merchant woman unload bundles of cloth, carried a water bucket to the cooks, and by the time the first pot of stew was ladled out, she was leaning against a wagon wheel with a cup of wine in one hand and half the caravan already laughing at some story she'd spun. It was one of those tales she could tell without thinking, half truth, half embellishment, about a gambling night gone wrong in a port city, ending with her vaulting out a second-story window to avoid an angry husband and landing in a fish cart. She played the beats perfectly, just enough self-deprecation to make it disarming, just enough wry detail to make it feel real. Kaelen sat near one of the fires, methodically oiling his swords, though his gaze drifted toward Izzi now and then. The scribe had taken a seat beside him, his knees drawn up, hands folded as if unsure what to do with them. "She does that everywhere," Kaelen said without looking at him. The scribe blinked. "What? Walk into a place and have the whole crowd eating out of her hand before the fire's even hot," Kaelen replied, wiping a blade. "She can't help it. It's her version of breathing." The scribe's gaze flicked back to her, lingering a moment too long. "She's very confident." Kaelen's mouth twitched. "Haha," he laughed. "That's one word for it." The laughter by Izzi's fire rolled into a round of questions from the caravan folk. Where had she traveled? Who had she met? What was the most dangerous thing she'd faced? She answered them all with that same spark, weaving truth and teasing until even the quiet ones were leaning closer. The scribe lowered his voice. "You and her? You've traveled together a long time?" Kaelen kept his eyes on the blade he was oiling. "Years." The scribe hesitated, fiddling with the cuff of his sleeve. "So she must be close to someone?" Kaelen finally glanced at him, reading the unspoken question easily. "Not like you're thinking. We've traveled together for years, sure, but it's not like that." The younger man nodded quickly, staring back into the fire. But every so often, his eyes slid toward Izzi again, just in time to catch her smile or the tilt of her head as she laughed. The kind of small details that stayed with a person far longer than they should. Somewhere at the edge of the camp, one of the caravan guards was watching too, though not with admiration. His gaze was sharp, following not just Izzi but the way her eyes kept drifting, however briefly, toward the scribe's wagon. The fires had burned low, throwing long shadows between the wagons. The air was cooler now, and most of the caravan folk were settling in for the night. Izzi still sat near her borrowed fire, her boots off, one leg stretched lazily toward the warmth, the other bent so she could rest an arm across her knee. She was halfway through a story about a card game gone wrong in a tavern outside Veylmar when a shadow shifted beside her. The young scribe stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, clutching a wineskin like it was both a shield and a peace offering. He began, clearing his throat. "Thought you might like some wine." Izzi lifted the cup in her hand. "Already have a glass?" Her lips curved. "But I wouldn't mind another." Relief flickered across his face as he stepped closer to pour. He nearly overfilled the cup before catching himself, splashing a few drops onto her fingers. She let him see the smile that followed, amused rather than annoyed. "You're not much of a tavern boy, are you?" she asked, tilting the glass in his direction before taking a sip. "Not really," he admitted, shifting from foot to foot. "My name's Renin. I'm a copyist, scribe, for Master Veyron. I keep records, transcribe contracts, sometimes read for him if the day's too long." "And carry charms," Izzi said lightly, her gaze flicking toward the pouch at his hip. Renin's fingers twitched, almost covering it before he caught himself. "That too, I suppose." He tried to meet her eyes, then immediately looked at the fire instead. "You've been to a lot of places?" "More than I can count," she replied, leaning back against the wagon wheel. "And some more than once, usually by mistake." That got a small, nervous laugh from him. Izzi sipped her wine, studying him over the rim. He was awkward, painfully so, but there was a sweetness to it, the kind that made her think of a puppy trying to guard the house with paws too big for its body. She found the whole exchange hilarious in a warm, harmless way, not that she'd ever say it out loud, and not that she was ruling out the idea of tossing him a bone or two before they parted ways. Renin took a breath like he wanted to say more, but one of the guards called his name from across the camp. He startled, glanced at her one last time and muttered, "Good night," before disappearing into the shadows between the wagons. Izzi watched him go, her lips quirking. "Well," she murmured to herself, "that was adorable." Across the fire, Kaelen smirked without looking up from where he was sharpening a blade. "Do I want to know? Not unless you're in the mood to watch someone trip over their own tongue," she said, finishing her wine. The camp had quieted to the soft hiss of embers and the occasional snort of a tethered horse. Kaelen's gaze dropped to it, not a threat, but a warning, and after a long pause, the guard stepped back. "Stay away from him." Kaelen watched him go, muttering under his breath. He turned toward where Izzi had been lying near the fire, half asleep with her wine cup beside her. But the bedroll was empty, the blanket discarded like she'd rolled out of it. Izzy? There was no answer. A slow knot formed in his stomach. He scanned the dark, catching the faint shuffle of movement toward the outer edge of camp. The scarred guard was gone, and so was one of the other men Kaelen had seen speaking with him earlier. When Izzi came to, her head was swimming. Not from the blow, they hadn't hit her, but from the wine still warm in her veins. Her hands were tied behind her, her ankles bound, and she sat propped against the wheel of a wagon in the shadowed edge of the camp. Two men stood nearby, scarred guard and his accomplice, a wiry fellow with a hooked nose. Izzi blinked at them, then at the rope around her wrists. "Well," she said, voice thick with amusement, "this is a new kind of hospitality. Normally people at least buy me dinner before the tying up part." The wiry man frowned. "Shut it. Is that your name? Because it's not very flattering," Izzi said, shifting her legs just enough to make the ropes creak. "What about you, Scarface? You into this sort of thing, or is this just for work?" The scarred guard's expression didn't change. "You ask too many questions." "Oh, I can ask more. I've got a whole list. For instance, is this the part where you try to scare me, or the part where you realize I'm enjoying myself too much for that to work?" The wiry man muttered. "She's drunk. Drunk enough to be charming," Izzi corrected. "Which is dangerous. You might end up liking me." The scarred man crouched in front of her, his shadow blocking the firelight. "You'll tell us what you want with the boy?" Izzi grinned lazily. "Oh, you're jealous. I get it. You saw us talking, and now you're wondering if I like scribes more than guards." The wiry one groaned. "Can we just gag her?" "You could try," Izzi said sweetly. "But I bite." The wiry man had clearly had enough. "That's it," he muttered, stepping forward with a strip of cloth in hand. "You're getting gagged before you talk us both to death." Izzi smiled as if he'd just promised her a gift. "Oh, finally. I was wondering when we were going to move to the fun part." He crouched, muttering curses under his breath, and in that instant she tipped herself forward, letting her bound body fall into him. It was clumsy enough to seem accidental, but as her shoulder brushed his belt, her fingers found the dagger hanging there. A twist of her wrist and it was hers, hidden behind her thigh before he even realized she'd touched him. He pushed her back against the wheel, grumbling, and turned away to complain to his partner. That was his mistake. With quick, practiced flicks, she sawed through the rope at her wrists, then her ankles. By the time the wiry man half turned again, she was already standing, loose hair falling over one shoulder, her dress sliding to reveal the pale curve of the other. Her breath came quick, not from fear, but from anticipation. The dagger flashed once in the firelight before it sank into the soft place just below his jaw. His eyes went wide, a wet gasp escaped, and then he crumpled soundlessly to the dirt. The scarred guard spun at the thump, only to see her standing over the body, chest rising and falling, the blade slick in her hand. She dragged the flat of it slowly across her lips, licking the blood away before speaking in a voice that was almost a purr. "I have questions." Before he could answer, a shadow loomed behind him. Kaelen's massive hand clamped over the man's mouth, the other smashing into the side of his head with enough force to drop him instantly. The guard slumped into Kaelen's grip like a rag doll. Kaelen looked from the unconscious man to the dead one at her feet. "Drunk? Really?" Izzi tilted her head, tucking the dagger into her belt. "Only a little." They dragged the scarred guard to the lee side of a wagon, away from the sleeping camp. Kaelen tied him to a barrel with thick rope, his hands pinned behind him and his ankles bound tight. By the time he came to, the orc was leaning against the wheel with his arms folded, expression unreadable in the dim firelight. Izzi crouched in front of the man, twirling her newly acquired dagger between her fingers like it weighed nothing. She flashed Kaelen a grin. "All right, big guy, you just stand there and look like you could break him in half. I'll handle the conversation." Kaelen said nothing, but the way he shifted his stance, broad, solid, and blocking the only clear way out, made the air feel smaller. Izzi didn't sit across from the guard. Instead, she slid onto Kaelen's lap sideways, her back resting against his chest, one leg lazily crossed over the other. The dagger danced in her fingers, the steel glinting as it spun. "Now," she began, voice soft but carrying that dangerous sweetness, "you and your friend went through a lot of trouble to have a little chat with me. I feel flattered, but I think it's time you tell me why." The man clenched his jaw. Izzi leaned forward, closing the space between them until her arms draped loosely around his shoulders. The dagger's tip found the back of his neck, just above the collar. "See, I'm patient," she murmured, her breath warm against his ear. "But Kaelen here? He's not exactly known for his restraint." Kaelen didn't move or speak. He didn't have to. His presence alone made the guard's breath hitch. The dagger traced a slow, deliberate line across the back of his neck, not enough to cut, but enough to make his skin prickle. Izzy's tone never changed from conversational. So, here's how this goes. You tell me who paid you, and we skip to the part where you get to keep all your fingers, maybe even both ears if you're lucky. The guard swallowed hard. I don't know his name, just a woman, hooded. Paid us to watch you, said to take you somewhere quiet if we had the chance. Izzy's smile sharpened. And this hooded woman, anything else? Voice, smell, the way she walked? She had black with red in her hair, he stammered, and a silver clasp on her cloak. That's all I saw. Izzy exchanged a glance with Kaelen over the man's shoulder, her smirk faint but knowing. Then she patted the guard's cheek twice, almost playfully. See? Wasn't so hard. Izzy slid off Kaelen's lap, handing him the dagger without looking back. You've got this? Kaelen nodded once. I'll take care of it. That was enough for her. She didn't watch. She never did when she trusted him to finish something. The faint scuff of boots on dirt and the quiet drag of a bound man into the dark were sounds she knew well. She weaved her way back through the quiet camp, the wine in her blood making the stars above tilt ever so slightly. Her boots scuffed softly against the grass, her steps loose and lazy. The fire near her bedroll had burned down to glowing embers. Sitting beside it was Renin, his knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a mug like it was the only thing keeping them steady. He looked up when she approached, and for a moment simply stared. The loose tunic she wore clung here and there from the day's heat, the curve of her waist visible when the fabric shifted. Her hair was a tousled spill over her shoulder, catching glints of firelight. Her cheeks were warm from the wine, her eyes half-lidded but sharp, and the faint smudge of dirt along her jaw only made her seem more real. You're still up, she said, voice soft and uneven. Renin's throat bobbed before he found his voice. I thought maybe we could talk more. She flopped onto her bedroll without ceremony, propping herself on one elbow. Careful, Renin, she said with a lazy grin. Women like me are dangerous when you talk to us at night. He hesitated, fingers tightening on his mug. Dangerous? Her gaze slid over him, teasing. The kind that kisses you before you know what's happening, or steals your coin while you're still thinking about the kiss. Depends on the night, and the wine. Renin's ears turned pink. He glanced into his mug, then back at her, not quite able to hold her eyes for long. Tonight, though, she murmured, letting herself sink back onto her blanket. I'd probably tell you you've got nice eyes, then fall asleep before I could do anything about it. Renin opened his mouth, closed it again. His mind tripped over the thought of her words, the way her tunic had slipped just enough to bare one shoulder as she rolled onto her side, the faint stretch of the fabric across her hip. That doesn't sound so dangerous, he managed at last. She gave a lazy little point in his direction. Come talk with me again tomorrow, on a better night. Her breathing evened out a moment later, the weight of sleep pulling her under. Renin sat still for a long time, listening to the quiet and trying very hard not to think too much about the curve of her smile or the way her scent lingered in the cool air. Finally, he spread his own bedroll near theirs. The firelight flickered across the silver clasp of the charm at his throat before the night breeze dulled it to shadow. Kaelen returned not long after, his eyes scanning the sleeping elf before he settled by the fire in silence. Awake and alert.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.